you. Good evening. I thank you so much for allowing me to be here. This is such an amazing ceremony. It's really a tribute to the kind of special organization that CAM is. There aren't that many special organizations in the world anymore, and I remember I always do a little bit of research before I ever come somewhere to speak. And as I read your story, I was just amazed. It was just filled with so much beauty. And it is, again, such a special place. And I thank you all for being here. I thank Deneen and the planning committee. I thank John for his skillful driving to get me here. So, and I really appreciate you. And I just want to say that it's always a pleasure to be in a room full of people of faith. Because faith is how we move mountains, how we change lives. And tonight you've heard the what, the how. You've heard how this organization started, what they do today, and I hope to bring you the why. Why it's important to empower people, why it's important to make sure that that person that you see on the side of the road gets another chance. And as I said, I'm really grateful to be here. And it's always comforting to know that there are great organizations like the Coordinated Assistance Ministries, or CAM. And I'll follow your lead, and it'll be CAM from now on out, okay? So it's really hard to do this work. It's hard to work every day to equip people experiencing homelessness with the tools for success. As we celebrate CAM's 30 years of service, we understand just how hard this work is. At times, we cannot measure success in numbers, but we can measure it in lives changed and dreams awakened. Organizations like CAM, again, are special places, and they're the answer to the question posed by the great poet Langston Hughes. In his poem, Harlem, Langston Hughes asks us the question, what happens to a dream deferred? It is my belief that deferred dreams are housed in special places like CAM. And they stay in those special places, and they wait patiently for the dreamers to arrive. So that's what happens to deferred dreams. They go to special places. My name again is Donald Whitehead. I'm the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless, and they give me a paycheck there every month. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about them a little bit. And you're taping this as well, so I best do that. So the National Coalition for the Homeless is the oldest national organization that works on homelessness. The coalition was founded back in 1984 by a group of individuals and organizations that was reacting to the plight of people in their communities who were so poor that they could not afford the most rudimentary housing. NCH founders saw the need to band together to pursue a national remedy for the most extreme forms of poverty in our country. NCH's founders shared the perspective that homelessness is the tragic consequence of an unconscionable lack of societal will to ensure all its members access to the basic resources necessary for survival. Since its inception then, NCH viewed homelessness as the ultimate societal injustice, for which the redress must involve the restoration of basic equality between its members. NCH framed its message in a civil rights context, calling for an establishment of a right to housing in America. Despite the coalition's diligent action in each of these realms, homelessness remains unabated and increasing. The combination of a struggling economy, COVID-19, the dramatic rise in housing cost, 18% year over year between 2020 and 2021. The destruction of low-income units in Chicago, Illinois, they tore down somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 units. They replaced them with 700 units and a tennis court. Wages and publicly funded income assistance continue to be fixed at levels far below the actual cost of housing. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition does a study every year called Out of Reach. And what they found in that study is nowhere in the entire United States can you afford a 2-bedroom housing unit at minimum wage. So if you work a minimum wage job, if you get subsidized income, you can't afford a 2-bedroom unit, so that leaves out every family in the United States. And there's only 10% of the country where if you work a minimum wage job, you can afford a 1-bedroom apartment. The rate of health uninsurance continues to climb, leaving millions without a source of payment for treating the diseases that prevent their return to work or access to housing. And rights as basic as meeting human needs like sleeping outside are being denied to people without homes. There are 168 cities or more by now in the United States where it's actually illegal to be homeless. You can be fined, you can be ticketed, you can be arrested. In the state of Tennessee, it's actually a felony with up to 6 years in jail if you're living outside. So we live in a country where homelessness has become an issue that people see as an issue of moral failure, and we know that that's not it. We know that people are not failed morally. They're failed by structural issues that cause homelessness in this country. Any one of us can be homeless if we miss a few paychecks. I talked in the beginning about deferred dreams with some authority because I'm a dreamer, and my dreams were deferred. I grew up in a house that my family didn't own. Our family of 8 lived with relatives for most of my childhood, and living doubled up is what it's called. And living doubled up is an unsettling state. One must tiptoe through life so that you never make enough noise to wear out your welcome. And I want to share with you my story. You heard my bio. That's what's happening now. I want to take you back a little bit. And I want to share with you something that you may not get to see. Like I said, you don't get to always see the results of your work. You don't get to see the tangible results of your work, but today you do. I'm the tangible results of people like you doing the work to change people's lives. So I grew up in a house that was 3 bedrooms. It was a house that was designed for 1 family, and we had 3 rooms in that house. I knew that was going to happen, but I'm going to keep going. So we grew up in that household, the 3 rooms, a kitchen. We had a bedroom that also doubled as our living room. And then we had a bedroom for me and my 5 siblings. That's how we lived. It was crowded. But in spite of it being crowded, we were a happy family. We did all the things that normal kids did back then. We played board games. We studied together. We read together. My mother bought us a set of encyclopedias, and we were charged to study those every night. So education was really important in my household. And my father, he worked hard. He worked 2 jobs, actually. But one day he was on his way home from those 2 jobs, and he fell asleep at the wheel. And he ran into a pole. His car actually wrapped around a pole in a U shape. And he left that accident with 2 scars. One was a scar right down the middle of his face. His face had actually split in half. And there was a really big visible scar. But the more important and the invisible scar that he had was a scar on his heart. From that day on, our household changed. It became a war zone. My father became an abuser. So when he came home at night, the first person he saw, that's who he beat. Sometimes it was me. Sometimes it was one of my siblings. But most times it was my mother. And that went on year after year, day after day. My grandparents lived under us, and they got tired of the daily beatings. They could hear them very vividly. And so my grandfather confronted my father in the front yard. They got into a big argument, and my grandfather shot my father in front of me and my siblings. So there was a lot of chaos in my household. But again, education was very important. So my mother really instilled in us the need to learn, the need to have education as the valuable tool to get through life. So we studied hard. I was actually a straight A student. I was a good enough student that I went to a school in my community that was one of the top 10 schools in the country at the time. And I did very well in the beginning. Academically, I was a straight A student. Athletically, I was on a football team. Socially, I was on the student council. But after being there for a couple of years, I found out that I suffer from an incurable disease. And there wasn't a lot of understanding about my disease at that school at the time, so I was asked to leave. And I left that school and I went to another school. It was a college prep school also. And things went okay for a while, but my disease is progressive and it showed up again. And again, I was asked to leave. And I left that school and I went to another school. This was a neighborhood school, so it wasn't a school that didn't have some understanding because there were other people there with my disease. And so at that school, I was really able to excel. I was the prom king. I was the homecoming king. I was Mr. Senior. I was vice president of my class. I was captain of the football team. And when I left that school, they voted me most likely to succeed. And I had scholarship offers from all over the country. But I decided to stay at home and go to the University of Cincinnati. I wanted to be a lawyer and a football player. For a while that worked out, but I had been there for a very short time, and they again found out about my disease. And although this was a school of higher learning, I was asked to leave. And so I left that school, and I went home to my parents' house where I was stuck. I didn't know what I should do. I didn't know where to go. I was kind of lost. But then I saw a commercial that said, you can see the world and be all you want to be. And so I decided that was a good thing, and I joined the Navy. And my ship went all around the world. It went to Africa, and it went to Australia, and it went to Hawaii, and it went to Thailand, and it went to the Philippines. Wonderful places, a lot of beautiful things, a lot of wonderful food to taste. I didn't get to do any of that. Because once they found out about my disease, they didn't let me off the boat, except during daytime hours. And I always had duty during daytime hours. And so eventually we went back to the U.S., and again, the United States Navy asked me to leave. And I went back to Cincinnati, and in the beginning, I was start living the American dream. I got married. I bought a home in the suburbs. I was able to have a lot of pretty cool jobs. I was a restaurant manager. I was a car salesman. I was an environmental activist. But one by one, I lost those things because of my disease. And I found myself homeless for the first time. I lost my car. I lost my wife. I lost my jobs. I became homeless. And it wasn't the homelessness that we talk about, that you've heard about tonight. I didn't sleep in an abandoned building or under a bridge or anything like that. I slept with a relative on their couch or in somebody's basement. Sometimes I even would get a room for a day or two at a hotel. And that went on for a long time, but then I ran out of places to go. So that's what happens on the street as you start to lose your way of dress or the way you look. People start closing doors on you, and you then end up homeless in the traditional sense. So people would let me in. I'd stay for a while, and then they'd ask me to leave as soon as they found out about my disease. And finally, again, I ended up on the street. And I remember being out there and always feeling like I would pass thousands of people every day. Literally, I'd be walking the streets of Cincinnati passing people. And what I noticed is that people never took the time to look me in the eye. Sometimes they looked past me. Sometimes they looked around me. It felt like I was invisible. And that went on for a long time. And the two things I remember most are being hungry and being lonely. When nobody ever says your name, that's a very lonely place to be. I didn't know anything about soup kitchens or pantries or anything like that. So I was always hungry, so I did whatever I had to do. Sometimes I panhandled. Sometimes I shoplifted. Sometimes I even had to dumpster dive. I did whatever I had to do to survive, and that went on for a while. And then one day I went to a bus station, and I remember seeing a bus station on TV, and that might be a place for me to go, so I went to the bus station, and I ran into these other homeless guys, and they said to me, first of all, what's your name? And I hadn't heard my name for a long time. That made me feel really good. But they told me also where I could find food, a roof over my head, and a warm place to sleep. And they told me about a shelter in Cincinnati. And I went to that shelter, and I stayed there for a long time, but I still wasn't ready. So I stayed there for a long time. One day I was there, I'd been there for a couple of weeks, and every day I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went to the day labor service. And I would work there, and I'd work 8 hours a day. I'd get transported 2 hours, and then I'd have an hour for lunch. And at the end of the day, I have about $20. And I worked really hard. I unloaded aluminum siding trucks by hand. I worked in chemical factories. I cleaned Riverfront Stadium, if anybody knows what that's at night. But I never had enough to be able to find a place to live. And I did that for a while. And then one day, a guy walked up to me. He was a guy, kind of hippie-looking guy. And he walked up to me, and I remember that conversation today because the first thing he did, he asked me my name, and he talked for an hour. I don't remember what he said in that hour. But at the end, he said, "Donald, I'm glad you're here." And that really touched me because nobody had said my name for a while. Nobody had been welcoming to me. And here's this guy that doesn't know me for Adam saying, "I'm glad you're here." And so that touched me. He also told me that there is treatment for my disease, and there was treatment right there at that shelter. My disease is the disease of addiction. And I talk about it in a disease fashion because that's what it is. It's not a human failure. It's a medical condition. It's a disease. It's incurable, it's progressive, and it's fatal if not arrested, but it is a disease. And so one thing about this program at the Greater Cincinnati Coalition, the Drop-In Center, was that you had to give back. So I had to do some community service in order to get into this program. So I started doing community service at the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. I volunteered for 6 months, and after 6 months, they hired me. And I became an outreach worker. And I created a street newspaper called Street Vibes. I created a television show called Street Vibes. I created a radio show called Street Vibes. And I started a band. You probably can't guess the band's name, right? So I wasn't very creative with names back then, so Street Vibes, the band, was invented also. But we also brought a lot of agencies in. We brought a lot of groups in. There had been about 20 people working in a coalition to help end homelessness in Cincinnati. We brought in about 50 more organizations, so that coalition grew to 70. 2 years after I became the outreach coordinator, I became the executive director. I was the first formerly homeless, first African-American executive director of the Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless. We became the first coalition in the entire country to have every agency involved in our homeless management information system. I know I'm in the weeds here, but that was a really big accomplishment back then. And so I did that for 2 years, and then 2 years later, I became a board member for the National Coalition for the Homeless. 2 years after that, I was the president of the National Coalition for the Homeless, and then 2 years later, I was the executive director. So I went from being on the floor at a shelter to the executive director of the National Coalition for the Homeless in 6 years. Probably. And I've been able to do some pretty fantastic things. There is the work I've done on the Hill. I've advised 6 presidents at this point. And they're Democratic presidents and they're Republican presidents. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that I can achieve the goals that I set for myself and my ministry, and that's to equip people who are experiencing homelessness to change their lives. And so I'm really... And that's one of the beautiful things I see tonight. I see people from all different backgrounds in a room together with one common goal. Let's change how people are treated. Let's equip people. Let's make sure there aren't people that are homeless in our community. And you should give all yourselves a round of applause for that. That is amazing. It doesn't happen everywhere, I'm going to say that. So I'll tell you a couple of other things that are highlights for me. I was able to speak before, I've been able to speak before the United States Congress on multiple occasions. I'm now, even though I struggled through the military, I'm now on the Secretary of the VA's Advisory Committee to End Homelessness. I've been able to speak at the United Nations. I've also been a guest on many cable shows. If you guys watch Dr. Phil, I've been a regular guest on that show for the last year. It's always interesting that I get more applause for Dr. Phil than the president. Yeah, so that's it's always interesting to me. So I actually have done 6 movies, and I've actually won an Emmy. I've also done some guest appearances or extra appearances on TV shows you may know, like The Middle. This may look familiar to you. It was only 3 seconds, but I mean, this may look familiar to you. I've also done stand-up comedy with Cedric the Entertainer and D.L. Hughley and Steve Harvey and a lot of other people. So I had the opportunity to stay in Hollywood and be an entertainer or to work on homeless issues. I decided to work on homeless issues. I think, because I feel that as an actor, I can go back at any age, because there's always a part. It doesn't matter how old you are, but I may not be able to end homelessness unless I get things going in the right direction now. So that is my goal, to end homelessness in America. We started something last year called the Bring America Home Now campaign. And if you go to our website, www.nationalhomeless.org, we hope you'll sign on as an individual, as an organization, as a body of faith, because we need everybody to say that it isn't okay that we have homelessness in America. Again, I ask you to continue to be here for the dream chasers like me. There's a lot of us out there. We may have stumbled, we may have fallen, but with support from people like you, our lives can change in a very valuable way, and who knows what we can give back. Everybody may not be able to go to Congress, but they'll give back in some kind of way. Booker T. Washington says it this way: success should not be judged by one station in life, but the obstacles they had to overcome to get there, and I truly believe that. We are in a crisis, though. Don't not let that be something you understand. And it's one that's framed by, as a result of people believing that homelessness is some kind of moral deficiency, as I said. In some ways, that's true. Growing and unabated homelessness is a result of a moral failure. But it's not the moral failure of the people experiencing homelessness, but the failure of our elected officials to provide resources at the scale of the problem. It's never been done. It's immoral that we sit by idly as people sleep on the ground, in cars, in the woods, in the richest country in the history of the world. It is immoral that senior citizens sleep in the back seats of vehicles and babies are born in abandoned buildings. I ask you to take a moment to envision a country where homelessness is no longer a part of the landscape anywhere in this country. Imagine that we live in a country where housing is a human right, and that the unalienable rights promised to us in the Declaration of Independence are available to everyone. Imagine a time when we are not satisfied with people living on the streets of our country. We were promised life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't pursue happiness in the back of a Buick in Kissimmee, Florida. You can't pursue happiness if you sleep in a park in Washington, D.C. You are not pursuing happiness if you don't have a place to call home. So I urge you to get involved. You're getting involved tonight. Please keep supporting CAM. Please make sure that this beautiful, special organization continues to thrive, because they're doing what we have to do in America. We have to get dissatisfied. We have to make sure that this country is the country that is supposed to be, a country where we all have the opportunity to change. And I think the person who says this best is a person that may be familiar to you. He's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. Martin Luther King said this in one of his last public speeches. It was in Where Do We Go From Here? He said these words: "Let us be dissatisfied until America will no longer have a high blood pressure of creeds and an anemia of deeds. Let us be dissatisfied until the tragic walls that separate the outer city of wealth and comfort and the inner city of poverty and despair shall be crushed by the battering rams of the forces of justice. Let us be dissatisfied until those that live on the outskirts of hope are brought into the metropolis of daily security. Let us be dissatisfied until the slums are cast into the junk heaps of history and every family is living in a decent sanitary home." And I truly believe that, and I hope you believe that, and I thank you so much for being here. In closing, I just want to say those 4 words to you that were said to me that made me believe that change is possible. Thank you so much, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.